President Trump wins again. He is calling it a total victory. It is a $515 million victory for the president and a terrible embarrassment for both New York Attorney General Letitia James and New York Judge Arthur F. Engoron. Earlier today, a New York appeals court threw out the massive civil fraud penalty against President Trump and his company. Remember, back in February of 2024, Judge Engoron found Trump exaggerated his wealth to get better business loans and ordered him to pay $355 million in penalties. That sum has now grown to over $515 million with interest. The ruling is part of a civil fraud case brought by New York Attorney General Letitia James after Judge Engoron's February ruling against Trump. The Attorney General said this.
Today, justice has been served. Today, we prove that no one is above the law. No matter how rich, powerful, or politically connected you are, everyone must play by the same rules. We have a responsibility to protect the integrity of the marketplace. And for years, Donald Trump engaged in deceptive business practices and tremendous fraud. Donald Trump falsely, knowingly, inflated his net worth by billions of dollars to unjustly enrich himself, his family, and to cheat the system. Donald Trump may have authored the art of the deal, but he perfected the art of the steal.
Well, Attorney General Letitia James may be eating her words. Today, a 5-judge panel in New York's mid-level appellate division found the verdict to be excessive. In the slapdown of both the Attorney General and the judge, the appellate panel wrote, quote, "While the injunctive relief ordered by the court is well crafted to curb defendants' business culture, the court's disgorgement order, which directs that defendants, meaning Trump and his company, to pay nearly $500 million to the state of New York is an excessive fine that violates the Eighth Amendment of the United States Constitution," end quote. President Trump, reacting to the ruling on Truth Social, writing, quote, "Total victory in the fake New York State Attorney General Letitia James case. I greatly respect the fact that the court had the courage to throw out this unlawful and disgraceful decision that was hurting businesses all throughout New York State." President Trump then went on and posted, quote, "Every single dollar was thrown out, even the penalties imposed on us by the corrupt judge of one of the most overturned in history, Arthur Engoron. I wasn't given a jury, and during the course of the trial, which lasted a long time, was not given one ruling in my favor by this political hack." But worse than him, if that is possible, was Letitia James, a corrupt and incompetent attorney general who only brought this case in order to hurt me politically. She is a Trump-deranged lunatic. They made me bond the outrageous sum, which never happened before, and which cost me millions of dollars a month. It should have never been allowed to happen, and everyone knew it. Importantly, the vote was 5-0, end quote. This afternoon, New York Attorney General Letitia James released this statement, writing, quote, "We will seek appeal to the Court of Appeals and continue to protect the rights and interests of New Yorkers," end quote. Professor at Yale Law School Jed Rubenfeld joins me. Good evening, sir. And can you tell me what the court said, what the issue was?
Well, first thing I got to tell you, there are almost 400 pages of opinion in this case from different judges on that court. There is not a single majority opinion. So even I haven't read fully all 350 pages of these opinions yet. But here's the basic thing, what your viewers should know. Trump was hit with a $500 million, that's a $500 million fine for conduct that under New York law is at most a misdemeanor. And if he had been prosecuted for those misdemeanors and if he had been found guilty, it would have been like a $5,000 penalty. Instead, he was hit with a $500 million penalty in this so-called civil fraud case. And, you know, there happens to be a constitutional clause about fines. A lot of folks don't know it, don't remember it, but the Eighth Amendment has a clause in it that prohibits excessive fines. That's what it says. And this is one of the most excessive fines that may have been handed down in U.S. jurisprudential history, $500 million for conduct that was at most a misdemeanor. And it got thrown out. The entire $500 million got thrown out, every penny of it, on the ground, according to at least two of the justices, that it was, three of the justices out of five, that it was unconstitutional, an Eighth Amendment violation.
Usually, a judgment of a judge in this instance, a penalty phase, is left to the discretion of the judge. It is so rare that a judge gets overturned because the Court of Appeals wasn't there. I think that's what's so extraordinary about this, is that not only that he got reversed and slapped around with it, but it's almost never that a judge's discretion on sentencing and penalty is reviewed.
Well, you are exactly right about that. The judge has to do something extremely unusual, almost unprecedented, to get knocked down this way. And unfortunately, that's what Engoron did. He you know, he maybe he was led into it by Attorney General Letitia James and counsel for New York. But what he did was he levied one of the hugest fines in civil law, civil fraud history, $500 million, where as you know, your viewers might know or might remember, there was no victim in the case. Nobody came forward and said we were hurt. No bank came forward and said, you know what, he didn't pay his loans, because President Trump did pay his loans. No bank came forward and said, you know what, if we had known what you're saying, we would have given him higher interest rates. Nobody said that. No, there were no victims. There was no testimony that anybody got hurt. And to levy a $500 million fine where you don't have any victims, you know, I had never seen anything like it, and that's why, you know, right away, as soon as that verdict came down, I started saying to people, this is an Eighth Amendment violation. Which at first people were saying, "Oh, what are you talking about?" But now just about everybody realizes that it was unconstitutional, an Eighth Amendment violation. That's the basis on which this $500 million judgment has now been struck down.
Well, I've disagreed with a lot of judges in my life, and thought that they were wrong, but they got the final word for it. I get it, but if you sort of rewind to this show, we were quite shocked at what the judge decided, because it was so far out of, it was just so grossly out of any standards that can be made. And, you know, the President Trump has always said lawfare, lawfare, lawfare. And I thought, well, in some instances, because you don't like the decision, but this really is lawfare, because this was so outrageous.
Yeah, you know, part of what's going on in this case is, I'm going to just be honest about it. It was a politically motivated case. Letitia James publicly stated her commitment to going after Trump, to bringing him down. And she said it publicly many times before she brought this case. And of course, at that time, if you can hit Trump with a $500 million damage award and force him to pay it, you can destroy him financially. He's the front runner for the Republicans at that time in the presidential election. It was, you know, it just looked so bad on its face, like politically motivated judicial, you know, weaponization of the judiciary, all the stuff that you hear about. This looked like it. And there was a serious danger that it could destroy him financially, because it's very tough to pay off $500 million. You know, where are you going to get that kind of liquidity? They were going to take all, she tried to take all of his properties. She tried to seize on and take over all of his properties in New York. She was trying to destroy him. And, you know, it really looked like she was trying to do so for political reasons. I'm just being honest here, because nobody had ever used this particular law this way. Nobody had ever sought or obtained a $500 million judgment for this kind of violation. So, you know, that's also unconstitutional. You cannot bring a case like this against somebody for politically targeting reasons. But that's not the basis on which the judges threw it out, although one judge of that panel did say so. But the majority, at least three judges said that the fines were unconstitutional, just outrageous, excessive, couldn't be sustained under the Constitution.
Well, she'll get a chance to get a review herself now. She can go to the highest court in New York and review, and we'll see what the highest court says. Professor Jed Rubenfeld from Yale, thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Former New York City prosecutor Jacob Kaplan joins me. Okay, Jacob, I think you and I have probably discussed this before, because, you know, and for my wildest dreams, I've been very hard on the New York bar, that the New York bar wasn't squawking both about this and about the criminal case. What say you tonight?
So the $500 million disgorgement, you know, that had to go. All the justices really agree that that was not right, Eighth Amendment wise. But what's interesting about this opinion is there's no majority. There is, you know, two judges saying that they would uphold everything, including the liability. There are two judges saying they would ask for a new trial. There's one judge saying it should be completely dismissed, but they all agree about the disgorgement. And what they did, interesting enough, is that normally when you don't have a majority, it goes back for a rehearing and re-argument. They didn't do that here. They agreed to kind of agree to disagree in a way, and made it a possibility that can go up to the Court of Appeals to get a final review instead of going back to another panel of the appellate division.
Is the state court system in New York like the federal system? They have to get permission. Like you have to get permission from the Supreme Court to be heard. Do they have to get permission to be heard by the highest court in New York, or would automatically be heard?
So normally you do have to get some sort of permission. In a case like this where there's a dissent, there's going to be permission. The lower courts can the judges on the appellate division can agree to send the case up to the Court of Appeals. In this case specifically, the way they structured this decision was with the intent to send it up to the Court of Appeals, so there'd be a final arbiter of the facts and the law in this case, as opposed to just kicking it around again in the appellate division.
Well, I tried to be very polite when the judgment came down, but Engoron really did lose his mind. I mean, this was really, he totally lost his mind. And I don't know why people weren't screaming. The New York Times should have been screaming about it. The lawyers who are advisors in the New York, everybody should have been screaming, because there is just nothing remotely like this. I wanted to wait for the Court of Appeals to rule, but there's just nothing remotely. And everyone acted like this was sort of the normal course of business. I don't know what this judge was thinking, why he's still on the bench.
Yeah. So the Court of Appeals, interesting enough, will rule on the liability issues, because right now, the majority of the court, I would say, although it's not really a majority, but they agreed that there was some liability here. So that was not overturned. And hopefully the Court of Appeals can review that to see how far the judge went. Obviously the $500 million was way too far, but did he go too far in finding fault and liability against Trump and his companies as well?
Well, I'll tell you what I would argue. The mere fact that he was so bizarre in that judgment, that $500 million judgment as a penalty, and since this was a non-jury trial, since he decided liability, I'd say just as he was so insane with that, he was just as equally insane in his findings of facts on the issue of liability, because this is not just a judge making a mistake. We all make mistakes or having a different judgment. This was something vastly different.
Yeah, I think the judges in the Court of Appeal will look at that. They'll look at the totality of the case, what the judge did, not just in terms of liability, but also in terms of injunctive relief, placing a monitor, as well as the disgorgement. So I think the Court of Appeals is going to give a real top-to-bottom review of what happened here, and I look forward to it.
And indeed I do. What are the lawyers saying around New York? Shocked? Or do they say we thought it's going to happen? Or this is typical Engoron?
It took a year or so for the appellate division, so that was kind of surprising to a lot of lawyers around here. Usually the appellate division comes a little quicker, but seeing the decision and the disagreement between the justices, it does make sense it took so long, but people around the courthouses are not surprised that the $500 million was overturned.
They could have spoken up a little. They could have spoken up, though. I mean, it was. I'm really disappointed in the lawyers in New York. Jacob Kaplan, thank you.
Greta, always a pleasure.
Hurricane Erin is whipping up strong winds and dangerous waves along the East Coast. In North Carolina, the Outer Banks saw waves as high as 15 feet crashing ashore. You can see those waves flooding a coastal motel. Hurricane Erin is also bringing life-threatening rip currents to the East Coast. The National Hurricane Center is warning beachgoers to follow advice from lifeguards and local authorities. These conditions are expected to last through the weekend. By Saturday, Hurricane Erin is forecast to be moving northeast between the United States East Coast and Bermuda. Coming up, President Trump's tune is changing. He says it just might be time for Ukraine to go on the offensive against Russia. That when the record continues. Big war news, and it is, as you might expect, not good. Overnight, Russia expanded its attacks on western Ukraine, not eastern Ukraine, but western. Russian forces sending hundreds of drones and missiles on Mukachevo and Lviv. Lviv is only 43 miles from the border with Poland. Mukachevo is near the Ukrainian borders with Hungary and Slovakia. In Mukachevo, the aerial assault struck an American-owned electronics factory, the strike adding more uncertainty to U.S.-led peace efforts. With this news, President Trump raising the possibility of Ukraine launching an offensive against Russia. Trump posted this on Truth Social. Excuse me. It's very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It's like that with Ukraine and Russia. President Trump also adds this ominous phrase, interesting times ahead. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned the latest attack as insane. He is urging stronger international pressure on Moscow, including tougher sanctions. European countries are said to be considering military deployments to deter future Russian aggression. What do you think? What do Americans think about Russia receiving any Ukrainian property? A new poll answers that. The Economist YouGov poll asked participants how much of Ukraine's territory they want Russia to have at the end of the war. 68% said none of it. 21% were not sure. 5% said some of Ukraine's territory. 2% thought Russia should get half. 1% wanted Russia to have most of it. Former U.S. Ambassador and NATO Ambassador Ivo Dalder joins me. Good evening, sir. And what are your thoughts about this attack so far west into Ukraine?
You know, this is just how Mr. Putin operates. One week he comes over to Alaska and gets invited by the President of the United States to sit down with him to talk about peace. And the next week he attacks American-owned factories in the west of Ukraine, as you rightly point out, very near the border of three NATO countries, Romania, Slovakia, and Poland. It's just who he is. He is bent on fighting this war. He's started it. He's bent on continuing until he gets what he wants, or until somebody can convince him that he can't achieve what he wants through the force of arms. And that's unfortunately where we are. More war until somebody, the pressure really gets pushed forward on Russia. The support for Ukraine intensifies, and the pressure on Russia intensifies too. Until then, we're going to continue to have this war, unfortunately.
Well, I was very much in favor of the president meeting with Putin in Alaska, just like I was very much in favor of him meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore in 2017 or so. But this does change the dynamics because now Putin has hit an American factory, right? Changes?
Yeah, you know, it's not surprising he does this. We don't know whether they actually knew it was American factory or whether he was trying to target something else. But nevertheless, he hit an American factory, you know, I'm all for talking to your adversaries. It's the only way that you get peace. And I think taking a measure of the man was a good idea in Alaska. I hope that the president, with the meeting he had with Vladimir Putin and then meeting with President Zelensky and European leaders a few days later at the White House, has come to the conclusion that the only way we're going to get to peace, to end this war, is if Vladimir Putin can be convinced that the course he's on is not going to succeed. And the only way to do that is to start increasing pressure. The president, before Alaska, promised that there will be severe economic consequences for Russia if it did not agree to a ceasefire. It did not agree to a ceasefire, but we have yet to see those severe economic consequences. President hopefully will continue to send arms as well to Ukraine.
I think the economic consequence is going to take a lot of thought as to how to do it, because secondary ones affects like India and China, and our economy is so dependent on things we import those. You can't just sort of flip a switch. We have to sort of think this one out. But the thing that worries me here is that it's so close. I mean, he's inching closer to Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary. And it does mirror sort of what happened in World War II when you have that encroachment that's headed west into these other countries. And I've been in Poland right after the war broke out. People were terrified in Poland that this is where Putin was headed, even though at the time it was just eastern Ukraine that was being hit, as they were worried about that encroachment towards Poland.
Yeah, and there's good reason for it, for the Polish worries, and indeed worries in Romania and Slovakia and all of NATO. And you've seen, particularly the East European nations, but all NATO nations now stepping up the kind of defensive preparations and the spending on defense. Poland is reaching 5% of GDP on defense. It wants to have an army of 500,000 troops. It is reinstituting conscription and all forms of training for its forces. They're taking their defense very, very seriously, not because they think it's fun. They think it's necessary. And these kinds of strikes make people very, very nervous. It's very important, I think, for the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and all NATO leaders to reaffirm at this point and send a very clear message to Russia that what's happening in Ukraine is one thing, but if it starts to inch into NATO territory, as these strikes are getting darn close to it, that will have severe consequences. That means Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which says an armed attack against one is an attack against all, would be invoked. and we would be in direct conflict with Russia. That's what nobody wants, but it's clearly a message that Vladimir Putin needs to hear.
Well, I think the timing is bad that he's going that far west to beyond Lviv into Ukraine. That at a time when we hoped everyone would want to be sort of figuring out how to, turn the temperature down and resolve this. Ambassador Dalder, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Coming up, President Trump took matters into his own hands and met with police and military forces right here in Washington, D.C. That when the record continues. Moments ago, President Donald Trump met with law enforcement right here in Washington, D.C. Here is the president.
Well, I just want to thank everybody very much for being here. I wanted to do this. We've had some incredible results. The results have come out, and it's like a different place. It's like a different city. It's the capital. It's going to be the best in the world. We're going to do what you're doing with law enforcement, and very importantly also, we're going to physically do it. We're going back to Congress for some money, and we're going to redo a lot of the pavement, a lot of the medians, a lot of the graffiti's all coming off real fast. It's going to come down real fast.
Political reporter Daniel Lippman joins me. Nice to see you, Daniel.
Good to see you. Thank you.
The city.
Trump loves the showmanship, and he ate a piece of pizza with the troops. And
well, I think they likewise enjoyed it, though. I mean, I think that the police in the city have felt not respected. And for the President of the United States to leave the White House and come down and have pizza and bring hamburgers with him, probably something something appreciated.
He actually got better press here than, remember when at the height of the George Floyd protests and riots, he did that famous walk in front of St. John's Church holding the Bible, and Mark Milley later had to apologize, and Mark Esper, they were saying, oh, it was a terrible moment, but this time he didn't do any of that, and he was totally entitled within his remit to actually talk to the troops. But what's funny is that I don't
think those people who protested were police, though, back then. I think those people were not. I mean, I know they weren't police protesting. The police have felt under siege in the city, and certainly they weren't in that crowd back then.
And that's not in. And this is not just D.C. It's across the country. It's hard to recruit police. DC has a shortage of hundreds of officers, which if they want to tackle crime, that's something that they should focus on in terms of having enough money and resources to do that. But what's ironic is that you have DC, which is the residents, 80% of them are against this federal takeover, and they say, oh, it's not going to make D.C. safe again. And
where do you get that 80%? Because that's sort of, I haven't done a scientific poll, but that's just, I live here. You actually live in Virginia, I might say across the river. I'm going to poke you a little bit about that. But I live in this city, and it has felt dangerous for a long time. And the police, the reason why we don't have a lot of police that are, that we have such a shortage is because morale is low. And the reason morale is low is when you've got politicians going around saying defund the police and they're spat on, it's that, it's like, who wants to be a police officer?
And they also see that when people do get charged, if they ever do get, 15-year-olds get charged with carjacking, where it becomes this type of sport, there's not actually real consequences. And so that, if you have incentives, then that will help a lot.
Which is the fault of the city council, because is that as a juvenile, there's certain laws that apply to the juveniles, and you got to follow the law when you prosecute them. But if the city council doesn't have sufficiently stiff laws so that we can, because it used to be that the crime was committed. Like when I practiced criminal law, my clients were 19, 20, 21. The ones who were committing murder and armed robbery. Well, now they're a lot younger. Now there were 3 girls that kicked some poor guy and let him bleed to death about a year ago here in D.C. There were 12, 13, and 15, I think.
And it becomes this popular thing on social media where if you're a 15-year-old with TikTok, oh, you jacked a BMW that you can brag to your friends. So where are the parents here? But also, if you throw the book at all of these people, sometimes they actually become more hardened criminals if you just put them in jail for a few years over.
How do you figure that? How do you figure that?
It's just, if you look at criminal, academic research, if you have more diversion sometimes, then get them into schools. Make sure that they find after-school programs and extracurricular activities, not just have them hang out with other criminals.
I think that sounds nice, and and this is what I would have argued in court all the time. But as a practical matter, first you have to protect the community. You know, before we, you know, it's like first we, you know, we get the morale up on the police, we protect the community. Once we protect this community, then we think of there's some other alternatives. But we're in a crisis here.
I think you can, you know, chew and gum and walk at the same time here, where we're never going to have a perfect. It's never going to be like Minority Report, where there's zero crime and you have the pre-con team trying to figure out where the crimes are. So there's always, this is a major city, and major cities there's inner city poverty. So it's very hard. You have to address the social factors as well to have long-term success.
All right. Well, anyway, there's a lot to talk about on that. Anyway, Daniel Lippman, nice to see you.
Thanks, Greta.
Coming up, is the Democratic Party in trouble? That one, the record continues. Trouble for the Democratic Party? Well, the New York Times seems to think so. According to the New York Times, of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one between the 2020 election and the 2024 election, and often by a lot. The New York Times goes on to say Democrats lost about 2.1 million registered voters between the 2020 and 2024 elections in the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, but Republicans gained 2.4 million, end quote. Real Clear Politics co-founder and president Tom Bevan joins me. Nice to see you, Tom.
Hi, Greta.
Your thoughts about this is really bleak news for the Democratic Party.
I mean, if you read through this New York Times analysis, and by the way, I mean, I'm as critical of the New York Times as anyone when it comes to sort of their liberal bias. And so kudos to them for doing this analysis. It was very, very, very thoroughly done. And I think pretty compelling. And what it shows is that Democrats are suffering at, registering new voters. And you mentioned the numbers. I mean, 4.5 million total between they've lost and Republicans have gained. And the number of new voters being registered, Democrats used to have a 9-point advantage. Now it's an 8-point deficit. And we see that showing up in these elections in places like Miami-Dade County in Florida, which Trump won for the first time in decades, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. In a lot of these states, Republicans are, winning the voter registration war. And this is one of those things that it's hard. It's been a while in happening over time. And it's something that's hard to turn around and hard to rectify.
Well, it says the New York Times says that Democrats lost 2.1 million in voter registration, which I don't fully understand. Maybe you can explain. It's one thing to be a member of a party, let's say Democrat, and not go out and vote. But are these people who are deregistering? I mean, are they actually not registered? I mean, have they said, adios to the party, or have they moved over to the Republican Party? How do you explain that number?
Yeah, I mean, these some of the folks are people, and they talk about this in the article, that actually, Democrats many Democrats have switched their registration, right? They've gone to the Republican Party, or they've gone to become an independent. And so it is that's the sort of double whammy where you not only lose a Democrat, but Republicans automatically gain someone. But you're right. Look, this is, as I said, this is something that's been going on for a number of years. And we've seen Republicans being able to, Pennsylvania is a great example. It's a swing state. Democrats had over a 500,000 advantage in terms of number of voters who were registered in that state. And now it's down to like 50,000. It's like 17,000 in North Carolina, which is another state that Republicans have been, really working hard in. And that's a state that they feel, they've won at the presidential level. So we're seeing it in a lot of these battleground states. And there's another interesting piece of the article, Greta, which talks about Democrats used to, they'd go out outside a grocery store with a clipboard and register folks in Hispanic neighborhoods, but now they're recognizing that no longer means they're registering Democrats. They could very easily be doing work for Republicans and registering Republicans. So they are trying to impose some sort of ideological litmus test to make sure that the voters that they are looking at are actually Democrats, because certainly among Latinos, but even some among African Americans, it's not a lock that these are all Democrats.
Well, unless the big, beautiful bill crashes and burns, and the secondary sanctions cause the economy to crash and burn, and the existing tariffs, is usually in the midterm elections, which is November of 2026, that the party that occupies the White House loses seats. But if on this hand, if those three things are successful, if the big, beautiful bill and the tariffs and the economy is sizzling, what's going to happen at the midterms is the Democrats are going to, right now it's sort of close majorities for Republicans, but the Democrats are going to lose a lot of seats, and that's going to give more wind behind the sail of the Republican Party.
It's possible. I mean, it's only happened 3 times in our history. And so that the in party actually wins seats in their first midterm election. And again, the margin's pretty slim in the House. There's only, 3, I think 3 seats now. But, and we've got these redistricting wars going on, right? Texas just added or will add a net gain of 5 Republican seats. That'll get their majority to 8. If California is successful, it'll go back down, but there are other states that are now in play. So, and there are just fewer seats across the nation that are competitive, which I think helps inoculate Republicans from being able to, losing in big numbers like we've seen in some of these midterm elections in the past.
Tom Bevan, Real Clear Politics, thank you.
Thanks, Greta.
And this isn't something you want to see when you are in the air on an airplane. On your screen is an alarming video taken by a passenger on Delta Airlines Flight 1893. As you can see, after the flight took off from Orlando International Airport and was on its way to Austin Bergstrom International Airport in Texas, a passenger noticed the Boeing 737 aircraft's wing break and begin to flap loose. Thankfully, the aircraft was preparing to land, but was still thousands of feet in the air when the wing broke. The flight carrying 62 passengers and 6 crew members landed safely in Texas. Following the incident, Delta released a statement that reads, quote, "The aircraft has been taken out of service for maintenance. We apologize to our customers for their experience, as nothing is more important than the safety of our people and customers," end quote. By the way, I hope they took that plane out of service. I don't know why they have to tell us in a statement. That would be a given. Coming up, the Menendez brothers could soon be one step closer walking out the door. That when the record continues. The 1990s were marked by several high-profile murder trials. O.J. Simpson was one. The Menendez brothers in Beverly Hills was another. In 1989, 21-year-old Lyle and 18-year-old Eric murdered their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. They were each shot multiple times with 12-gauge shotguns. The brothers' first trial was in 1993, and it resulted in a hung jury. In 1996, the second trial ended with first-degree murder convictions. They have been behind bars ever since, but that could change very soon. Today, Eric went before the California Parole Board. Lyle faces the board tomorrow. The hearings have the potential to lead to their release. The brothers do not deny killing their parents, but they have long alleged they were sexually abused by their father, Jose. They claim that their mother, Kitty, was aware of the abuse, but did nothing to stop it. Criminal defense attorney Mark Garrigus is representing the Menendez brothers. He joins me. Nice to see you, Mark.
How are you, Greta? Boy, this is when we first started doing TV together, so it's been quite a while.
And to think neither of us has aged, that's
right.
Exactly. Anyway, yeah, it's all right. This is when we probably first met over Menendez. All right, so tell me, if Eric gets paroled, it's pretty likely Lyle will, right?
That's what you would think. I mean, they both have done programming, is what they call their work in prison, that is remarkable and at the same time stands on itself. Eric with the hospice programs, Lyle with the community service. But at the same time, they've got the safety net that the governor can always weigh in one way or another, either through clemency or accelerating the parole. And we've got a live habeas corpus where the judge has already made a finding in the last 30 days that we've made a prima facie case. So they've gone from no hope back in 2005 to a wealth of possibilities, including we're waiting, as you and I do this today, we're waiting to see whether or not they get the recommendation, at least Eric today.
How many people are on this parole board?
2. There's a number of them, the in-bank, but he's before 2 people today, right now, as we're speaking, and they are actively engaged, and that's the process. At some point tonight, they will recess, and like a jury, they will deliberate and come up with their decision.
And does it have to be unanimous? It's only 2 people.
Yeah, otherwise it's a hung parole, yes. So yes, I would imagine it does.
And if they vote to parole them or not to parole them, does it automatically go to Governor Newsom regardless of the decision? Can Newsom overrule the parole board?
Yes, I've actually had that experience, not with them, but with another client many years ago. If Governor Newsom or the governor were to revoke it, then you go to Superior Court, and we've done that also, and you can successfully get that overturned.
Do they show remorse?
I can't imagine more remorse. And as I always said, you don't have to believe me. They're a unicorn situation. Only one other time in my almost 43 years of practice have I ever had uniformly all the surviving family members of both the victim and the defense uniformly asking for them to be released and saying that they've made amends and that they've forgiven them.
And this whole thing about the father abusing them, do those family members, were they aware of it back in 1989, and are they, do they defend the two brothers that indeed they were viciously abused by their father?
Absolutely, and they knew in real time that something was amiss. Both when we did the sentencing hearing in May, we had two of the family members take the stand and testify to what they called the hallway rule. The hallway rule is if Jose was down the hall with Eric or Lyle in a room, you were not allowed to go down the hallway. Kitty enforced that. That was something that really put a lot of these family members who visited the family in the home, it put them out. And they believe them, they know it, and they've reconciled with Eric and Lyle about the failure to take action, and they've testified repeatedly about it.
If, okay, you can't just kill your parents even if they do abuse you, but it's not murder in the first degree. It might be something like manslaughter. Back in 1989, if they'd been tried and been charged with manslaughter or somethsomething, when would they have likely have been out?
Guess what happened? See, 93, as you mentioned in the setup to this, they tried this case in Van Nuys Superior Court, the LA Superior Court branch in Van Nuys. The jury was given the option of not self-defense. That's where the current DA keeps kind of playing dumb. They were given imperfect self-defense, which will reduce murder to manslaughter. Half of two separate juries, half voted not guilty on the murder, guilty on the manslaughter. What happened was, between the time of the first trial and the second trial, 8 days before the second trial started, OJ was acquitted. The DA, as you might remember, was in a fight for his life. And when that happens, everything changed. At the second trial, they weren't given any of the due process that they normally would be getting, and the jury was not afforded that opportunity to find the manslaughter in the second trial. So, long-winded answer, back in the 90s, even with the less evolved time that we lived in, jurors, when presented with the evidence, half of them fully found that it was not murder. And answer to your ultimate question, they would have been out of custody. And if they had been the Menendez sisters, they never would have been convicted of murder.
Mark Gargas, nice to see you. We watch you, see what happens. Thank you, sir. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Greta. Good to see you.
The jury has been selected in the Donna Adelson murder trial. Donna Adelson is the wealthy matriarch accused of hiring hitmen to kill her former son-in-law. Adelson is charged with first-degree murder of Dan Markle. In 2014, the Florida State University law professor Markle was murdered in his driveway. Adelson has pleaded not guilty. She is the fifth person to be charged in the case. 4 others have been convicted, including her son, Charlie Adelson, and his ex-girlfriend. Others convicted were the 3 hitmen who carried out the murder. Attorney and anchor for Court TV, Julia Janae, has been following this case very closely. She joins me. So tell me, they now have a jury?
We have a jury just seated, Greta. It's been all day. This is day 3 of jury selection. Everyone was expecting that openings would start today, but 8 men, 6 women will be serving on this jury, and those openings will start tomorrow morning, all in the case of a woman who is a mother-in-law accused of plotting to kill her son-in-law. And this happened so many years ago. We're talking 11 years. There were a lot of jurors who said they did not know anything about the case. Others who said they did, but they guaranteed the court that they could put their feelings aside and be fair and impartial in this case. So everything is pointing to what we're going to hear in those opening statements tomorrow.
Julia, I covered this case in 2014 when that law professor got gunned down. What has taken so long? I don't know whether she should be in trial or not be in trial, but at least, here she is in trial. What took so long?
Yeah, this is a highly unusual way of prosecuting a case, Greta. I mean, 2014 is when this happened. Dan Markel was gunned down in his driveway in Tallahassee, Florida. It was so unusual. It shook this community here. And it took a couple of years before they could piece together who actually committed this, because those two convicted hitmen, they actually were from South Florida. And after some really great policing and investigative work, they were able to connect the hitmen to the crime, and one of them flipped and was able to testify against them. But then we started to see this slow domino effect of prosecution. First, they tried to prosecute the hitman and the ex-girlfriend. She was not found guilty in that particular trial because she had a mistrial, but he was found guilty. And then they moved to another trial for her. When she was finally found guilty, that's the first time that they moved to the actual family members of this victim, the Adelson family, and starting with Charlie, who was charged in 2022 and then convicted in 2023. And Donna Adelson was not charged until she tried to take a flight to Vietnam, a non-extradition country, and now she is charged and standing trial starting tomorrow with those opening statements.
Not that it makes a difference in terms of the crime, but how much did the hitmen get paid?
They shared about $30,000 between them. They purchased some motorcycles and various items, nothing major. Now, the go-between, she was able to get money as well, Catherine McBanoa, and she also received a Lexus, a used Lexus from the Adelson patriarch, who has not been charged in this case, Harvey Adelson. He's the dental practice owner who was the head of this family, but he is inside of this courtroom supporting his wife. He was not inside of the courtroom for his son's case 2 years ago, but that was when it was a very big question of whether they would be charged, and they've been avoiding Tallahassee, Florida ever since.
And Court TV's Julia Janae, I hope you come back tomorrow night because I want to follow this trial. Thank you. Coming up, flying cats and dogs. I'll explain. That when the record continues. Check out this flight that just arrived in New Jersey. The flight brought in 120 dogs and cats. They're from Louisiana and Alabama. They are now in shelters across the Northeast, waiting to be adopted. Greater Good Charities and Clear the Shelters organized the flight. They say it will give the animals a better chance to find forever homes. So go pick out one of these pets. Give them a home. Rob Smith Tonight is up next.